For years, the international community has sided with the Palestinians, condemning Israel's claim to the West Bank. However, under the Trump administration and their push for a peace deal, that appears to be changing. We will discuss the prophetic implications of this turn of events on today's edition of End of the Age. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining me on this edition of End of the Age. I'm Dave Robbins with Endtime Ministries. Now, we're going to talk about the peace agreement today as we go through the program, but from a little different angle than we've talked about it in the past. I'm going to go through quite a few maps and show you exactly what we're talking about as we go through, and I'm going to give you some history behind it all that you may not have heard before. Resolution 242. It's what a lot of this boils down to. And so we're going to get into that because you need to understand when you're talking about this and trying to explain it to your friends, family, your sphere of influence, really what we're talking about. But I want to give you a kind of set the stage here for what's going on at the United Nations. You know, just like Bible prophecy tells us, the United Nations, or the end-time effort towards a world government, which is what the United Nations is. It's the seat of world government in the earth. It's going to be anti-Israel. I mean, it's the world governing armies that will invade Israel at the Battle of Armageddon. And the United Nations has shown itself to be anti-Israel many times. For instance, just recently, the United Nations published the controversial blacklist of businesses that operate in the Jewish areas over the pre-67 lines in East Jerusalem, the West Bank, the Golan Heights. Now, we know that God gave them that land thousands of years ago, but yet the international community doesn't recognize that. They say it's not lawful. It's illegal, actually. But the United States and Israel, they've worked for 3 years now under the Trump administration to suppress the publication of this database dubbed the Blacklist because they feared that it would be used to help those who oppose Israel's presence over the 1967 line and that they would boycott those businesses that are over there, the Jewish settlements and the businesses that they have. With ties to those areas. So Israel, get this, from the United Nations, Israel is the only country against which such a list has been compiled of businesses speculated by breaking international law. Israel's the only one. So the United Nations, totally anti-Israel. They've shown that many, many, many times over. And of course, when it comes to the peace plan, President Abbas of the Palestinian Authority, he's used that to his advantage many times when it came to past peace initiatives. Went to the United Nations, and which has a lot of Arab leaders in it, and they have joined with him in looking down upon Israel and stating, hey, this is illegal, and hey, we joined together. They can't be out here. They call it occupied territory, not disputed territory out in the West Bank. So we're going to talk about that today. I'm going to go through some maps and some history to kind of give you an idea of what's really going on. Now, the first article I'm going to talk about is about this gentleman right here that you can see on the screen, President Mahmoud Abbas. The article comes from the Israeli Hayom news source, and it says that the Palestinians are returning home from the United Nations with their tails between their legs. Obviously, you got in your mind a dog that will lose a fight. He runs off with his tail between his legs. Well, that's kind of what happened to the Palestinians this week at the United Nations. What happened? This is actually a picture of Mahmoud Abbas at the United Nations Security Council meeting, where he came to bring a resolution against Donald Trump's peace agreement. Why are we talking about Donald Trump's peace agreement? Really quick. It's prophesied in Scripture that there will be a peace agreement that starts the final 7 years. Do we know if it's Donald Trump's peace agreement? Not 100%. It could be. We're still watching how things play out before we jump off that limb. But it absolutely could be. And we're watching it really closely right now. But things are happening right now that are unprecedented. That's what we're going to talk about today. So Mahmoud Abbas went before the United Nations on Tuesday to bring a resolution against Donald Trump's peace initiative. Well, he went away with a bloody nose and a black eye. What happened? So President Abbas, he's going to hold, he come to bring the resolution against this, and it was shot down completely. He couldn't even get near enough votes to even get them to vote on it. So they knew that going in, so they pretty much just postponed it, even if they'll ever have it. So I know we're coming up to break. I'll get into it when we get back from the break. What really happened, and really what's Abbas doing about it? He's going home wounded.
About our trip, it was a wonderful experience. We totally enjoyed the time spent with other believers, worshiping and experiencing the places where Christ walked. One of our favorites was being on Mount Moriah, where the Holy of Holies are, the Dome of the Spirit. And the teachings that Brother Baxter did was so enlightening. It was so much to take in. It will take us another month or two to really grasp the full extent of the knowledge we received on this trip. Our tour guide in Israel was fantastic. He was very knowledgeable. I think God chose him just for us. Thanks, Jana. Our lives will never be the same. We will try to do this tour again. Mike and Julie L., Cayman Islands.
Join us May 1st through May 16th, 2020, for a trip to the wonderful land of Israel and the Holy Roman Empire reborn.
We've seen Bible prophecy fulfilled like never before. From the halls of the United Nations to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, Endtime Ministries continues to reveal the Bible prophecy in the news headlines around the world every day. Whether it's through our broadcast or online at our Jerusalem Prophecy College, your gifts enable us to put vital materials in the hands of those who need it most. Because of you, we continue to replace fear with faith in the hearts of Christians around the world. We will continue to see prophecy come to pass at an even swifter pace. We need your support. Your donation of any amount enables us to continue to broadcast and be a voice in the ever-growing censored media. To become a partner or give a one-time gift, visit endtime.com or call 1-800-END-TIME right now. That's 800-363-8463. Go online now. Visit endtime.com.
So, what's going on right now with Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas? Well, it was said on Wednesday that he's going to hold several diplomatic meetings before he returns to Ramallah from New York, and this was told to us by members of his delegation. And a senior Palestinian official said that Abbas wants to meet Jordan's King Abdullah II and Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and discuss with them the consequences of the Palestinians' failure to condemn the Trump administration's peace initiative at the UN Security Council. This source said that there's an atmosphere of bitter disappointment among the members of the delegation who went to the UN with Abbas. Abbas has always had favor at the UN. Not this time. And the sense is that they said the sense is that we're coming back with our tail between our legs. We were caught unprepared, and we didn't properly assess the American pressure on the members of the Security Council. And you remember that the UN Security Council that back in when Obama was just leaving office in 2016, they passed Resolution 2334 that said, hey, the West Bank, even East Jerusalem, and Israel's presence there is illegal in the eyes of the international community. Well, Abbas thinks, hey, I'm going to go to the UN Security Council and I'm going to pass this resolution. Everybody's going to vote on it, and we won't have to worry about Trump's peace deal anymore. Well, it's like he's not thinking, because on the UN Security Council, the United States has veto power. Even if they got the nine votes out of the 15 members that they needed, we could have vetoed it. So it was really, I kind of scratch my head at these things. But what happened? Well, the official that was telling them this, he added that representatives from almost all of the UN Security Council members told the Palestinian delegation that they sympathized with the Palestinian claims, but that the Americans brought all of their weight and influence to bear to strike down the draft resolution that was presented by Tunisia and Indonesia on behalf of the Palestinians. Because obviously the Palestinians can't bring it themselves, so Tunisia and Indonesia brought one on behalf of the Palestinians. And they added that the moment the draft resolution was changed to a softer version that completely excluded any explicit condemnation of the Trump's deal of the century, there was no longer any point in bringing it to a vote, even if they had a majority. And like if there's 15 members, if they could have got 14 of them, they said there's really no point, because the United States was just going to veto it anyway. And they said that we are still in shock from the cold shoulder, get this, that they received from Arab states. You see, things are changing right now. They're not how they've always been. And chief among them was the Emirates of the Gulf Emirates, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. They gave them the cold shoulder when the Palestinians were at the UN this week. So things are changing at very high level, not in favor of the Palestinians. So it must be noted, though, that despite the united front presented by the Palestinian Authority against the U.S. peace initiative and the support for Abbas's boycott of President Donald Trump and his administration, some officials within the Palestinian leadership are calling for a change of thinking in the wake of that UN fiasco that happened on Tuesday. There are a lot of people in the Palestinian Authority that said, hey, we might have to look into maybe a regime change here, because what Mahmoud Abbas is doing, that's not working on an international stage. So one official actually said the time has come to break free of the conception that's shackling Abbas and his old guard. I mean, think of it. Abbas is serving, he's in his 16th year. He was elected into a 4-year term. He's now in his 16th year of that. Think about that. He's really an illegitimate president. And a lot of people are looking at that. And they said that whereby the international community and the Arab countries, that they would care for Palestinian interests. They say this is all changing. And they said the president and his people are cognizant of the lukewarm responses from the Arab countries against the plan, and the fact that there also isn't a sweeping opposition to Donald Trump's peace plan within the international community. Not everybody's against it. Matter of fact, many people are okay with it. And that the draft resolution was pulled at the Security Council, it proves the claim that the time has come to change the thought process and to reconsider the boycott of the Trump administration and the peace plan that it formulated. They're thinking, hey, the things that we've always done, they're not working now. People aren't accepting Mahmoud Abbas like they did originally, because Donald Trump has put so much pressure, and he's actually put forth a pretty good peace plan that even though they had it presented to the UN Security Council, didn't work. They actually didn't even present it because there was no point. It never came up for a vote. And so I've read articles where it said they postponed it and now it's done. A lot of different things. So we've got to talk about that because Donald Trump's peace agreement is like a giant snowball that's rolling down a hill now. And a lot of people, there's actually a meeting that they're trying to set in Cairo, Egypt, with many of the Arab nations to have Prime Minister Netanyahu from Israel go down there and meet them to talk about the peace deal and normalizing relationships with Israel. A lot of things are happening that are totally unprecedented in the Middle East. Could this get a peace deal signed? I mean, it's very, very, very possible. Is Trump's peace deal the one that starts the final 7 years? At this point, we don't know for sure. I mean, it could be. A lot of things line up with the prophesied peace agreement. It could be, but we're waiting to see how some things play out before we say with 100%. So, what are we talking about here? Why would we talk about this today? Because you need to know some of the background. So we're going to talk about a few maps here. Very important. Let me go through some history, bringing us up to, I'm going to go through thousands of years of history real quick, bringing you up to the current situation. So it all boils down to Jerusalem and the Promised Land. Jerusalem becomes Israel's capital. So King David made Jerusalem Israel's capital in 1000 BC. And it was David who said, if I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget her cunning. If I do not remember thee, let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. If I prefer not Jerusalem above my chief joy. So a lot of it centers, if not all of it, centers right around this little city called Jerusalem. Of course, there's more to that than a promised land. But God said, I will put my name there forever. Where? In Jerusalem. And then, of course, in Jerusalem, the first temple was built by Solomon. King Solomon, David's son, built Israel's first temple on the Temple Mount. If you don't know that for sure, you got to read my article in the next March-April edition of Endtime magazine. I went through it on the radio program here a week or so ago, but I finalized everything, got all of it put together, and now it's coming out in a big article in the next issue of Endtime magazine. You'll definitely want to read that article. I asked Irvin Baxter, I said, when he read it, I said, well, did I convince you that the temples were built on the Temple Mount? He said, yeah, you actually did. We kind of laughed because obviously he's believed that forever, as I have, but there are more and more people that are arguing against that nowadays, and that's why we felt like we ought to put it in the magazine. So hopefully you guys will be able to glean from that. But King Solomon built a temple on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. It was dedicated in 968 BC, and God said to Solomon concerning the Jerusalem and the Temple Mount, I will put my name there forever. Well, then the first temple was destroyed, and you have the 70-year exile when the Israelites went into Babylonian captivity. The Babylonians, led by King Nebuchadnezzar, they destroyed the Temple Mount in 586 BC, carried the people of Judea away into Babylonian captivity, and they were there for 70 years. And then they came back. And that's when the second temple was built on the Temple Mount. After 70 years in exile, the Jews returned to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. The second temple was completed in 516 BC, and Jerusalem continued to be Israel's capital until the Romans destroyed the second temple in 70 AD. Well, in 70 AD, that began the next 2,000-year exile. So for the next 2,000 years of exile, religious Jews, they prayed 3 times a day for the rebuilding of the temple, and their faces turned towards Jerusalem. And when Jews were parting company, the customary greeting was, next year in Jerusalem. Well, now we're going to jump 2,000 years from the destruction of the second temple in 70 AD to modern time. And at the end of this 2,000-year exile, about 1,878 years, roughly in there, Theodore Herzl, father of the modern Jewish state, he was yearning to return to Israel to begin intensifying with a lot of other people. The yearning was intensifying in the Jewish hearts during the latter part of the 19th century. Theodore Herzl was a Hungarian Jew who grew up attempting to fit into European culture. But Herzl grew to believe anti-Semitism could not be defeated or cured, only avoided. And the only way to avoid it was the establishment of a Jewish state in their homeland. And so in June of 1895, Herzl wrote in his diary, "In Paris, I recognize the emptiness and futility of trying to combat anti-Semitism." Well, around that time, Herzl started writing pamphlets about a Jewish state. And he claimed that these pamphlets resulted in the establishment of the Zionist movement. And they did play a large role in the movement's rise and its success. And I'm getting to the map in a minute, so just hold your horses here, everybody. So I can hear you through the radio. Dave, get to the map. I'll get to the map here in just a second. So Herzl spent the rest of his life visiting presidents and prime ministers, urging the establishment of a Jewish state. Herzl predicted that within 50 years of his death, a Jewish state would be born. Well, he died in 1904, and the state of Israel was born in 1948. And today, Herzl is revered as the father of the state of Israel. Well, then you go to World War I. The Ottoman Empire captured Jerusalem in 1516 A.D. The Ottoman control of the Middle East continued until World War I, 1914 to 1919. So with the defeat of Turkey's Ottoman Empire in 1917, control of the Middle East shifted to Great Britain and to France. You understand the British Mandate? Well, you have the Balfour Declaration. When the Holy Land came under the control of the British, influential Jews petitioned the British government to facilitate the establishment of a homeland for the Jews. On November 2nd, 1917, British Foreign Minister Arthur Balfour wrote to Lord Walter Rothschild. He said, "His Majesty's government views with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of that objective." And so this historical statement from the British government became known as the Balfour Declaration. Now, we're getting to modern-day Palestinians and what's going on with them in Israel and Trump's peace agreement. But if you don't understand all of this, there may be a time when you might start agreeing with the international community against Israel with the Palestinians. You can't do that. You need to be able to explain this, to tell people, hey, no, that's not the case. Because you're being fed a lot of propaganda now by major news sources and the United Nations, a lot of different things, because they're very anti-Israel. And so to set up this peace agreement that Donald Trump's doing, a lot of it was based off of Resolution 242, which is what I'm getting at in a minute, and the maps. So the British Mandate. At the 1920 San Remo Conference, the victor nations of World War I assigned the mandate for Palestine, which is what the nation of Israel was at that time. The original Jerusalem Post was originally called the Palestine Post. All of this area of Israel was Palestine. So the mandate for Palestine was given to the United Kingdom under Article 22 of the Covenant of the League of Nations after World War I. The Allies also decided to make the United Kingdom responsible for putting into effect its own Balfour Declaration, 1917. And the action of the League of Nations enshrined the Balfour Declaration into international law. So, they recognized Israel should have a nation in their homeland. So, Hitler's horrible Holocaust happens. 1939, the world's worst war broke out. And over the next 6 years, the 52 million human beings met violent deaths. I mean, among these were 6 million Jews that Adolf Hitler had shipped off to concentration camps, among other people. It wasn't just Jews, but obviously the big majority of them were Jews. So just when the Jewish people thought that their lives couldn't get any worse, I mean, imagine, well, it did. Hitler's gas chambers and crematoriums, they cruelly snuffed out young and old alike. I mean, in other words, they were being, there was anti-Semitism happening, but obviously when the concentration camps started happening, that was the worst. And Hitler's goal was to rid the earth of the Jews once and for all. And he called his extermination campaign the final solution. So what it brought us to originally was a map where the United Nations, in the 1947 map, when the United Nations was going to give them the partition plan. So what happens? Well, the United Nations, and this is the map we're looking at now, the UN votes to establish a Jewish state. And when the magnitude of Hitler's horrible Holocaust was revealed to the world, the collective guilt of the world's nations compelled them to finally grant the Jewish people a place to call home. And on November 29th, 1947, this is the map that they come up with. The United Nations voted to partition the area of the Palestine mandate, the British mandate, into an Arab state and an Israeli state. And this is what you have here. This is the map. The pink on here was, and down here in Gaza in the lower Negev desert, this is what they gave the Palestinians, or the Arabs at that time that were living in Palestine. And the beige part here was the partition plan, the partition plan for the Israelites. So very, very important. So this is the map that was released. So you can see that totally indefensible borders. I mean, Israel, you're looking at 9 miles wide here at the belly at that point. And so not much, but Israel said, yeah, we'll take it. I mean, they were just ready to have a place in their homeland. So I know we're coming up to a break here, and so I'm going to go through many more maps as we go all along here and explain to you how we got to where we're at now and what happened at the United Nations. There's a lot going on behind the scenes.
Move Mountains with Irvin Baxter. This book by Irvin's grandson provides 30 days of devotion that will enhance your relationship with God and others. Authentic illustrations from early morning devotions at Endtime will help you find your purpose and eliminate fears. Commit to taking this 30-day journey and experience real life change. Get your book for only $14.99. Call 1-800-363-8463 or go to endtime.com/move.
About our trip, it was a wonderful experience. We totally enjoyed the time spent with other believers, worshiping and experiencing the places where Christ walked. One of our favorites was being on Mount Moriah, where the Holy of Holies are, the Dome of the Spirit. And the teachings that Brother Baxter did was so enlightening. It was so much to take in. It will take us another month or two to really grasp the full extent of the knowledge we received on this trip. Our tour guide in Israel was fantastic. He was very knowledgeable. I think God chose him just for us. Thanks, Jana. Our lives will never be the same. We will try to do this tour again. Mike and Julie L., Cayman Islands.
Join us May 1st through May 16th, 2020, for a trip to the wonderful land of Israel and the Holy Roman Empire reborn.
If your station only carries the first 30 minutes of End of the Age, go to endtime.com and click the watch button to continue today's broadcast. You can also finish up later by clicking the archive button.
So you get what's happening here. The concentration camps were liberated in 1945. Well, the Jews were saying, hey, we've got to have a homeland here. Well, in 1947, you have the partition plan that was given to them. They partitioned the Palestine at that point is what it was called. And Israel was given just very small slivers of it, but they were thrilled. I mean, they were thrilled to have a homeland, the Jews, after almost 2,000 years of being sifted through the nations. I mean, once the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, they were just scattered all over the place. But they were started to come back home. The United Nations says, hey, we'll partition it, we'll give you part of it, and here they come. And they immediately accepted the partition plan with joy. Just even though it was just a minute sliver of what God had promised Abraham back in Genesis chapter 15. And you realize that he promised Abraham from the great river down in Egypt all the way up to the Euphrates River. So this was just a little portion. But they realized we're going to take what we can get, and they were happy to get it. But on the other hand, the Arabs that lived there, they immediately rejected the UN plan because they didn't want the Jews there at all. They didn't want them having a 2-foot strip. They didn't want them having everything. They didn't want them to have a state. They didn't want them to be there. They simply wanted to eradicate the Jews. But the Jews weren't going to allow that to happen. So, they accepted it, and Israel declared independence on May 14th, 1948. Well, of course, after policing the area of Palestine for 28 years, the British were tired of the continual conflict between the Arabs and the Jews. Now, the Arabs that lived there, they call themselves now many Palestinians. That's where you get the Palestinians today. They were Arabs that lived in Palestine. But guess what? There were Jews that lived there too. So what happened? Well, they wanted out. So finally, the British announced that they were concluding, the British wanted out. The British concluded the British Mandate on May 14, 1948. And this decision left the Palestinians with no one to keep order because Israel said, hey, we're claiming our independence here. And so when the British forces on May 14th, when they left on May 14th, the Jews, they made their move. Israel declared its Independence Day the same day, May 14th, 1948. Well, the Arabs just said, no, they just were up in arms. The very next day, 5 Arab nations, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, launched war against this newborn Jewish state, which was just, I mean, if you look at the entire Middle East, look at the little sliver of Israel. You realize Israel is only, 250 miles long and 45, 50 miles at the waist? Very, very small. But the Arabs could not get it in their mind. No, we don't want a Jewish state here. We're not going to give them any. Even this little sliver that they were given, they were going out of their mind. So they attacked the Jewish state. In 1949, there was a ceasefire that was reached between Jordan and Israel. And this is what we ended up with. This is the partition plan. This is what we ended up with in 1949. Because of the war, Israel had gained more than the partition plan had given them. Jordan occupied the West Bank. Jordan had moved in here and occupied the West Bank and East Jerusalem, including the Temple Mount. And Israel controlled its partitioned area plus gains that it had made in the war. See the difference in the map here? See all this beige area is cut and there are different things. When you jump over here, they actually controlled more at this point. And this included western side of Jerusalem. But they still didn't control the Temple Mount at this point. Now, when a ceasefire was finally declared in 1949, this is the 1949 map, Jordan occupied the area of Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, and it also controlled East Jerusalem, including the Temple Mount. Israel controlled the western part of Jerusalem. And this situation right here lasted for the next 19 years. And Jordan had actually occupied this illegally. Prior to that, Jordan didn't occupy that. The Arabs and the Jews that lived in Palestine did. And so in 1949, after the war, Jordan illegally occupied the West Bank area. This, again, it was like this for the next 19 years. Well, then comes 1967. And in 1967, by that time, Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser believed that Egypt and her allies were strong enough to destroy this 19-year-old nation of Israel. And boy, they were fixing to find out, were they ever wrong? So what he did, he ordered the UN troops out. There was, between Israel and Egypt, there was a station of UN troops like there is now up on the other side of the Gaza, or the Golan Heights. He ordered them to leave. What did they do? They pick up and leave. And what he did, he replaced the UN troops with his own Egyptian troops. And he then blockaded the Straits of Tiran, and he denied Israel access to international waters, which was a blatant act of war. Well, Nasser signed mutual defense pacts with Jordan and Syria, and during May of 1967, he made several speeches announcing his intentions of launching a war against Israel. And, of course, the handwriting was on the wall. Israel saw that war was inevitable. So, consequently, on June 5th, 1967, Israel's Air Force launched a preemptive strike against the Air Force of Egypt. And 99% of Egypt's Air Force was destroyed before their planes could leave the ground. And the war was virtually over before it really even started. Well, of course, hostilities immediately began between Israel and Egypt and between Israel and Syria. Now remember, Israel has only been there at this point, 20-some years. And so a very young nation, but man, they're fighting for their life. And they did valiantly. So hoping to keep Jordan out of the war, Israel Prime Minister Levi Eshkol, he sent a message to King Hussein of Jordan. And the message simply said, the state of Israel has no quarrel with you. If you stay out of the conflict, we won't attack you. However, if you choose to join the war, and remember, Jordan had all of the West Bank at this point. They're way over into the Israel territory. But he said, if you join the war, Israel's going to come against you with all of her might. Well, guess what? Jordan launched an attack against Israel on June the 7th of that year. Israel counterattacked, and the Temple Mount was taken. Israel rolled back the Jordanian occupation of the West Bank, the Judea, Samaria, and it drove Jordan across the Jordan River back into the country of Jordan. And after 6 short days, Israel had defeated Syria in the north and Jordan on the east and Egypt in the south. 6 days, everybody. And most importantly, Jerusalem was reunified and the Temple Mount was in Israeli hands for the first time since the Romans drove them out in 70 AD. Now, if you look at the map here, you can see Israel in the yellow. In the yellow is what they had for the 19-year span. When they got done with the 6 days war, they had this Sinai Peninsula all the way down into Egypt. They had the Golan Heights. They conquered the West Bank and Gaza. So they had all of this huge area right here. Now, they ended up giving Sinai Peninsula back to Egypt. And they gave, obviously, Ariel Sharon gave Gaza gave that to the Palestinians in an effort towards peace. And man, that's worked for them, hasn't it? That's almost laughable. But now they still control the West Bank and the Golan Heights. So it's very, very important because there's a huge situation going on right now. A lot of this gets back to what happened after the 6 days war when Resolution 242 was brought on by the United Nations that said, hey, here's what we've got to do here. And a lot of things today go back to Resolution 242. The international community and the Palestinians, neither one of them are interpreting the Resolution 242 correctly. Israel is. the Trump administration's peace plan is, but not the international community. They've said an actual lie about it for so long that when you read it in the newspaper, you think, well, hey, maybe the Palestinians may be right on some of this. Maybe Israel shouldn't have settlements out there in the West Bank. If you don't know what's really going on here, you could tend to believe that. So what happened? Well, it's very important that we understand. That's why you need to understand the maps. Because Israel, when you look at some of these things, and I'm going to go through some of Resolution 242 here in just a moment, but when you look at some of these maps, it talks about aggressor states. Israel had warned Jordan, if you come across, we're going to attack you. Jordan could have stayed out of the war, but they chose to be the aggressor and came in to fight. And of course, Israel had to drive them out of the West Bank. Israel didn't want to go to war with them. Israel didn't want to go to war with anybody. But the fact of the matter is, if you don't know the history behind all of this, then you can start to believe the propaganda by the United Nations, which is anti-Israel, and by the media, even media here in the United States now, which can be anti-Israel. So it's very important that we understand these things, because when we talk about Trump's peace plan, I'm probably going to talk about it here in the next segment, my final segment today. A lot of it goes back to Resolution 242. I mean, the Israel Hayam, they reported that Trump's plan takes Resolution 242 seriously. And get this, it's the first time in all these peace initiatives that we've seen that anybody does that. It's very, very important. So what we're going to do, I tell you what, I know we're going to come up to a break here in a minute, and I don't want to cut these sections off, but when we get back from the break, we're going to go to the modern nation of Israel. I mean, what happened was Israel eventually gave the Sinai Peninsula back, and like I said, they gave Gaza to the Palestinians down there on the southwest border, and this is the modern day map of Israel, where they control the West Bank and they still control the Golan Heights. So very important. There are some Palestinian factions here in the West Bank as well, but Israel controls all of that. We drive through there when we go to Israel every year. I've been to down in Bethlehem, and I've been to down in Jericho, many different places. When we get back, we're going to go through some more maps, some more history, and Donald Trump's peace plan, because you need to understand the history behind all of this to understand what's going on in the news right now.
Does the book of Revelation frighten you? Do its symbols confuse you? For centuries, the book of Revelation has been misunderstood and misinterpreted. In Revelation, the unveiling of Jesus Christ, Volume 1, Irvin Baxter unlocks the mystery of the book of Revelation with in-depth analysis and commentary like you've never heard before. This 10-part definitive DVD series and 268-page comprehensive commentary book covers the first 12 chapters of the book of Revelation, featuring on-location photography, classic artwork, and symbolic illustrations. You'll walk away with complete understanding and peace about the events happening during the final years on Earth. These comprehensive study tools, available for $299, will deepen your biblical understanding as you dig into the original intent of the book, answering the mysterious prophecies and symbols of the book of Revelation. Don't miss this special offer. Call now, 1-800-ENDTIME, or go to endtime.com to order. Call or go online now to get this comprehensive Bible study.
So, if you look at the modern day map of Israel here, there are Israeli settlements out here in the West Bank, because once after 1967 borders, they went out there and started eventually to have settlements out there. They said, hey, this is our homeland, and we're going to build settlements out here. But the fact of the matter is that the international community says, whoa, hold up. That's against the law. Remember Resolution 2334 that the Obama administration actually let passed in the UN Security Council, which says, hey, you guys occupying this area out here, that's illegal. Even East Jerusalem, that they conquered in the 67 war. And the Palestinians say, we've got to go back to 67 borders. That's where we got to start negotiations. Well, Donald Trump's peace agreement actually looks back to Resolution 242. So, ever since the Trump administration published the Middle East Peace Plan, critics have claimed that it violates the UN resolutions, and it challenges many of these internationally agreed parameters and that have been guiding peacemaking since 1967, this 67 war we talked about. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, this is the first plan, Donald Trump's plan, that is actually relates seriously to the document every plan cites as the basis for those parameters, this UN Security Council Resolution 242. The resolution was adopted in November of 67, right after the 6 Days War, actually 5 months after Israel had captured the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, Golan Heights, East Jerusalem, the Sinai Peninsula in the 6 Days War. 5 months later, Resolution 242. Contrary to popular belief, it was carefully crafted to let Israel keep some of that territory by demanding a withdrawal only from territories occupied in the recent conflict, rather than the territories or all the territories. The terminology there is very, very important. Only some of the territories, not all. Remember, the Sinai Peninsula, the Golan Heights, the West Bank, Gaza. Well, as America's then the UN ambassador, Arthur Goldberg, said, that the omitted words were not accidental. The resolution speaks of a withdrawal from the occupied territories without defining the extent of the withdrawal. In other words, they didn't have to withdraw from everything, just a big part of it. And then Lord Caradon, the British ambassador to the United Nations who drafted the resolution, he said it would have been wrong to demand that Israel return to its positions of the 67 borders because those positions were undesirable and they were artificial. They couldn't do that. So, the reason was that, in the resolution's own words, a just and lasting peace would require secure and recognizable boundaries for all states and regions. But the 67 lines, you remember the little strip I showed you? In the 67 lines, which would be the 47 armistice lines, they didn't provide secure boundaries for Israel. Goldberg explained at the time that the resolution called for less than a complete withdrawal of Israel forces because Israel's prior frontiers had proved to be notably insecure. They couldn't secure the borders. That's what Israel would be gone today if they can't secure them borders. Imagine a nation, not even a state, but a nation being 9 miles wide at the waist. You can't secure them borders. So, since Israel has captured these territories in defensive rather than an offensive war, the drafters considered these territorial changes fully compatible with the resolution's preamble, emphasizing the inadmissibility of the acquisition of this territory by war. So the international community says, hey, it's illegal that you're out there. You can't take any, you can't have any settlements out there. Not according to Resolution 242. Now you hear about it in the news that it's illegal in the international community and the Palestinians, but if you understand history in Resolution 242, that is simply not the case. But then, having successfully defeated the Arab-Soviet demand, that Israel be required to cede all the territories, back when Resolution 242 was put together, and the Arabs, Soviets, they were defeated. They didn't say, they wanted it to say all the territories. But that's not what Resolution 242 says. America abandoned its hard-won achievement just 2 years later when it proposed the Rogers Plan. And the plan called for an Israeli withdrawal to the 67 lines with only minor adjustments, since nobody back then envisioned a Palestinian state. The West Bank would be returned to Jordan, even though Jordan had illegally occupied it in 1948. So, this formula really made a mockery of Resolution 242. It failed to provide Israel with secure boundaries. Most every subsequent proposal retained the idea of you got to go back to 67 borders with minor adjustments, even as all of them continued paying lip service to Resolution 242. Now, for the first time, and I mean in 2020, Donald Trump's plan, a plan is attempted to take that resolution, Resolution 242, seriously and provide Israel with defensible borders. Donald Trump went all the way back. They did their history. They know what's going on. They didn't look at, hey, here's what's going on right now. We got to settle. They went back and they did the history of everything. A lot of thought went into Donald Trump's peace plan. And now Donald Trump's plan actually puts forth the principles of Resolution 242. And that's why it assigns the Jordan Valley to Israel. Let me go to another map. So this is Donald Trump's vision for peace, the conceptual map. Now they're working on maps right now to do every square inch of this. They're working on those maps right now. But Donald Trump's map, it reflects the long-standing Israeli consensus that this territory is crucial to defend. That was the big thing, Resolution 242. You got to have defensible borders to defend the country against threats from the east. In regard to the name, obviously, the Jordan Valley. It's kind of misleading because that makes the area critical for defense, and that's its high ground. So when you talk about the Jordan Valley in the east and west, the eastern slopes of the Jordanian mountains and the Sumerian hills, you've got the Moab mountains in the east, and then you've got the Judean and Sumerian hills on the other side. So that leaves the Jordan Valley. So even Israel's mainstream left has long deemed the valley essential. Israel has to have this Jordan Valley to protect. They've got to have defensible borders. They can't do that if they go west of the West Bank. So, and aside from this brief flirtation of the Oslo-era delusions of a new Middle East, Israel's Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, who signed the Oslo Accords in 93, he said in his final speech to the Knesset in 95 that Israel's security border will be located in the Jordan Valley in the broadest meaning of the term. So today, both the center-right government and the main center-left opposition party, they both agree that Israel has to retain the Jordan Valley. Now, parties that are seeking to cede the Jordan Valley, they constitute a mere 20% of the Knesset, just 10% of the Jewish members of Knesset. Why they would even want to cede that it blows my, I can't even comprehend that. There's no way you'd be, if they were ever attacked at this 9 mile wide, that's totally indefensible. Think about that. So there is a similar consensus around the need for the belt of territory near the Green Line, where most settlements lie, since this provides a territorial buffer for Israel's major population centers and a united Jerusalem under Israeli rule. It's essential because dividing it would leave Israel's capital vulnerable to nonstop shelling from the city's eastern half. And you imagine dividing, I can only imagine dividing Dallas in half between two nations. One of them wants to drive you off into the sea. The international community, these people, I don't know what they're thinking. They're not thinking. That's the point. So for evidence of that, look at Jerusalem's experience when the city was divided from 48 to 67, or the experience of communities along the Gaza border today. And even rabbis, their final speech envisioned Yitzhak Rabin, in his final speech, he envisioned a united Jerusalem under Israeli sovereignty. So the plan's limited version of the Palestinian sovereignty derives from the need for defensible borders. Donald Trump knew that. Jared Kushner knew that. Netanyahu knew that. The Palestinians could care less about that. But when Donald Trump drew these maps, which are in the Peace to Prosperity Peace Plan, you can go to the whitehouse.gov. I mean, there's a lot of places to look at it. They knew exactly what Resolution 242 said. They recognize that This is the current map of Israel, and they said, hey, we're willing to create a two-state solution. We're all of this blue area here. In other words, this is Israel's part, and with the settlements out here. But with the blue, Palestinians would be given an autonomous situation, self-governing, a two-state solution. And then the Palestinian plan in the Trump's peace plan would be obviously be given Gaza with these West Bank tunnels and things that connect this area. And, of course, high-tech manufacturing, residential and agricultural areas, many different things. Ports, airports, a lot of different things. Israel's willing to give a lot. But yet, they have to have defensible borders. If you look at these maps, the Trump administration, they did their history. They know what's going on, and they're still obviously asking Israel to give up some of the promised land, which they shouldn't do. But the Bible says they're going to do. Jesus said in Matthew 24, when you see the abomination of desolation occur, let them which be in Judea flee. In the future, there's going to be a temple built on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And when the Antichrist stands in that temple, claims to be God, Jesus said, let these Jews living out here in this, in the West Bank area, this original Judea, Palestine, or Judea, Samarian area, let them flee. So Jesus was prophesying that there is going to be a hostile situation that's going on when this abomination of desolation occurs, and that there would be a mass slaughter. He said it would be great tribulation like has never been before, nor ever would be again. And that's what would happen. Well, you can see this being set up just like Jesus prophesied 2,000 years ago. This is what's being created. And Donald Trump's efforts towards peace and these maps that he's put out, if you see all the maps back from the beginning, the partition plan, all the way through to what Donald Trump has put together, he's actually looking back at Resolution 242. It's the first time that that has been proposed in over 50 years, the nation of Israel. And so, very, very important that we understand this going off into this peace agreement and what's happening in the future. Don't listen to United Nations propaganda. Don't listen to the propaganda by the mass media, because Israel's in the right here, and so, other than trading some land for peace. And the Trump administration, their peace plan goes right along Resolution 242. How it's all going to play out, not sure at this point. We're following it very closely, and we'll keep you up to date. God bless, and thank you for joining me on this edition.
This has been End of the Age, brought to you by the faithful partners of Endtime Ministries. If you're not currently a partner with Endtime Ministries, or if you would like more information, we invite you to call us at 1-800-ENDTIME. That's 1-800-363-8463, or visit us online at endtime.com.
Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel and like our Facebook page.